Welcome to the Metabolic Museum University on the 6th of December 2023. The MMU, which I'd describe as a curatorial infrastructure for working with collections, researching new transversal methodologies, and engaging in dialogue and debate. The website, which some of you may have already explored, but which is open for you, was designed by Rana Kobel in Berlin, engineered by Happy Server and funded by KW Institute for Contemporary Art. So please do spend time looking at our past projects and browsing in the library or listening to the debating chambers. Tomorrow at KW, we'll be launching the book Skin in the Game in the eponymous exhibition at KW, and we'll start at 7 o'clock. Unfortunately, it won't be live streamed, but for those of you who are in Berlin, please come by. I'll be in conversation with novelist Tom McCarthy. And in the book, it actually goes back to the beginnings of the MMU, the Metabolic Museum University, right to the beginnings in Kiev, in Ukraine in 2015. And then it goes through the different iterations at KW when the pandemic began and we had to relocate everything we were doing to online bureau d'esprit and kind of like debating chambers. So this is why this tradition of working online, it continues. And the second half of the book is conversations between myself and Collier Shaw, Ottobon Nkanga, Ruth Buchanan, Rosemary Trockel, Joël Tuerlings and Andrea Zettel, and it's related to this question of skin in the game. So today is our final debating chamber of the year. The debating chambers will resume in February 24 in cooperation with Canal Centre Pompidou in Brussels. And I'm working on different angles to this and visiting very bizarre collections at the moment. It's possible that there could be a sort of tendency to look at traps and entrapment and pathological collections that can be found in the city of Brussels. So I'm just kind of getting my feelers out as to how to think of the MMU in this context. So before we begin our fourth debating chamber on blood and living alloys, I'd like to first thank all the amazing provocateurs from our first season, beginning with Daphne Ayas, Charles Tessou and Pierre-Alexandre Mateos for risk and transgression in curatorial practice, and their Museum of the Slut Machine, which was brilliant. And then Annika Larsen, Juliette Desorgues, and Abba Zahedi for figureheads and emancipation. And then the last time, Jeanne-Ange Vagne, Jan Le Gall, and Luc Willis-Thompson for collections and contention. But I'd also like to thank and say how much I appreciate the faculty of the MMU and the amazing work that's been done. So thanks to Joanna Owona, who will moderate tonight, Ollie George, who's here and is a saboteur, Eddie Wenani, Felipe Merez, Toby Upson, Jacob Carperson, Christina Scheib, and of course the excellent Linus Kaufhold, who is mastering the decks. Now, before I hand over to Joanna, I'd like to relate something from my past that really changed my way of working. It was in 2014, so amazingly 9 years ago, just before I was unjustly fired from the Weltkulturen Museum in Frankfurt. I was invited to speak in Barcelona by Paul B. Preciado, then Beatrice, who was beginning their transition. And the conference was called Decolonizing Museums, and it was held at the MACBA, literally a few weeks before Preciado was also fired from the museum. And they were fired from the museum for exhibiting a work by the Austrian artist Ines Dujak. You may remember the scandal around it. The sculpture depicted a dog penetrating Bolivian Union leader Domitila Barrios de Chungara, who in turn is penetrating the former Spanish king Juan Carlos I, who's vomiting flowers onto a pile of Nazi helmets. I have to say I've never taken part in a more engaged conference. It was a space of dialogue where the concept of trans was central to the decolonial procedure. And Paul and I remained in close contact. And in 2018, they wrote a manifesto for my project, which is called Organs and Alliances, and which I'd like to read out to you in part. The full manifesto can be found in French and in English under Organs and Alliances on this website, the website of the Metabolic Museum University. So let me just read this to you. The trans body is to normative heterosexuality what Palestine is to the West, a colony whose extension and form is perpetuated only through violence. Cut here, paste there, take out those organs, replace them with others. The trans body is Palestine. Every day on any street in Tijuana or Los Angeles, in St. Petersburg or Goa, in Athens or Seville, a trans body is killed with the same impunity that arises when a new occupation is carried out on one side or the other of the Jordan River. There is a war being fought for the imposition and normalization of the organs of the trans body. The migrant loses the nation state, the refugee loses the home, the trans person loses the body. They all cross the border constitutes them, they live at the crossroads. A body exists as an erotic landscape. Wherever one designates a sexual organ, one institutes a procedure of capture and colonial exploitation. The trans body is a colony of disciplinary institutions, of the media, of the pharmacopornographic industry, of the market. The trans body is Africa, and its living organs speak languages unknown to the colonizer. When each tree has been cut down and each mountain pierced, there will be nothing else to fuck. Then the earth becomes a garbage dump, a huge trans body opened out and dismembered. The corpses of colonizers will be buried with the trans organs that they stole from us. Only our imaginary organs cannot be buried. They will live forever. Our imaginary organs will become the warriors of the crossing. End of quote. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome in order of presentation, Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, Göksu Kunak, Kat Dawson, May Howard, and Ollie George. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Clementine. That was a fantastic introduction to tonight. My name is Joanna Owuna. I'm part of the MMU faculty. And I'm very pleased to welcome you now as the moderator and also timekeeper for this debating chamber, the last one of the year. But as Clementine said, we have more to look forward to immediately tomorrow, of course, but also next year. And just generally, debating chambers are basically here to clash disciplines, to center visual thinking. And tonight we have the title of Blood, Living Alloys. So we want to talk about, as we framed it, current moments of decay and regeneration, fusions and alloys, gaming and camouflage, and all those as strategies for defining human existence and looking towards, of course, trans and queer philosophies on life. And as Clementine introduced, we have 5 brilliant speakers. But before we start, I do need to do some, housekeeping, some information on procedure. And as you might have noticed, we are recording the event. So you will find the records of every debating chamber on the website of the MMU website, just as the visual provocations, the bureaus that you will see in a short while. And you will also, of course, see when a new event is coming up on the website. You can sign up to it and keep in touch. And though we record, there is the possibility, if discussed with us, to keep out certain things in the recording that will be publicized. So meaning that if you're here, like in the live event, you might have more insights into something that might be maybe a sensitive content that we are not publishing, as this is also a space for thought experiments. But as for chronology, for this debating chamber, we have 3 provocations, meaning that we will be guided through a visual provocation in the Bureau d'Esprit. These are 7 minutes each, which I will do my best to time. And then we will have 2 sabotages, 2 saboteurs who have each 5 minutes to react to the provocation, maybe reflect on their own stance, just generally give, maybe a mediation on today's discussion. And then we will, of course, have reactions to those as well. And we will finally go into our public debate, and everyone is very welcome to get involved. Without babbling on too much, I want to welcome our provocateurs and saboteurs. I'm very delighted to welcome Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, Göksu Kunak, Kat Dawson, May Howard, and Ollie George. And I would love for you all to introduce yourselves to everyone. Please take the floor.
Hi, I'm never shy, so I'll jump first. Hi, I'm Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley. I'm a tech nerd and currently extremely freezing. I make video games that really center on Black trans life and kind of questioning the audience's role in viewing art and why the hell we're all so passive right now and doing absolutely nothing. That's my introduction. I don't really want to talk about what I've done.
Hey all, I'm Göksu Kunak. I'm an artist, writer, and researcher, and I was born in Ankara, Turkey, so also it affects my research a lot in terms of late modernisms and politics in the Middle East. I make performance and installations and videos, and I'm very into hybridity in so many senses, which I will also talk about today. Thank you.
Hey folks, my name is Kat Dawson. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an art historian based in Brooklyn and Berlin, and I examine the ways in which art, technology, and the body get processed and filtered through primarily postmodern and contemporary visual culture.
Hi, my name is May. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an artist, researcher, and writer. I teach disability studies and am currently working as a Whitney Museum Independent Study Fellow. My work is interested in the nexus between debilitation, disabling products, and excess.
Hey, my name is Ollie George. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an artistic researcher and designer based in Berlin and also a faculty member of the MMU. In my practice and through the MMU, I'm interested in researching sonic and technology-driven forms of memory and the specter of a sonic monument, which I direct to the voice, oral history, and what I enjoy most, the contemporary medium of the voice note.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will jump right in. We will start with Danielle and Danielle's provocation. And just a short note, we usually don't like to use the chat and we usually like to just talk to each other. But as we discussed before, for Danielle's provocation, please do use the chat because it will be interactive. Danielle, you can start right now and I will start the time of 7 minutes.
Me too. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. I have a short amount of time, so I'm going to speak kind of quickly, but as clearly as I possibly can. This is not a passive presentation. Your involvement is actively encouraged at all moments in time. I'd love you to scream out, to type in the chat, do whatever you want. That's completely fine. But my topic is on silencing. And currently we're in an epidemic of being silenced and silencing other people. It's not exactly clear all the time when the silencing is happening and who it's happening from, but it's getting harder and harder to freely speak about lots of topics and to feel comfortable about talking about most things and trying to say your opinion rather than echo an opinion that's popular. And it's not fair to say this is only happening from one side, because I'm scared to talk about so many things. It's become even harder to talk about trans, and I don't know why, but it's become even harder to talk about my own identity within a world in which I'm constantly needing to talk about it. And so the current world has been polarized by opposing views. Oh, let me get rid of you so I can't see you. There is no place for nuance, no place for thinking. If you don't think like me, you deserve to be silenced. I don't think that, but that's what I feel that people are thinking. What's more to blame, social media or cancel culture? Okay, you have 10 seconds to scream out which you think is the biggest to blame out of these two right now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Social media wins. Social media's algorithms prioritizing conflict. It sells more, it attracts more, it drains more. And I'm sure we've all been sucked into this thing of just looking at terrible things constantly and getting into that mindset, and kind of, I feel like social media just engages and adapts our fears in a way that is very marketable, enables us to form these bubbles and trauma bond with groups, and allowing us to start to pull away from actually trying to find resolutions to conflicts and engage with conflict just for conflict's sake. And it's very frustrating when we're trying to actually fight for the rights of people, and we literally can't, because there's not an ability for us to listen to anything being said. It's only an ability to echo something that we feel comfortable in hearing. Switch. Are you more scared to state your honest opinion? Yes, no, or some opinions should be silenced? I'll give you 20 seconds this time. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now, you wrote yes and no, big mix. Can you state why? Why do you feel that you're more scared to state your opinion? And why don't you feel that you're more scared to state your opinion? And I'll give you 30 seconds for this. 10, well, not 10, 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, and I'm going to read them out. Coming from Turkey, gel is a thing. The more options, the better, because there is weight behind people speaking up and stating their opinions collectively. There is a line, though. I don't believe stating opinions without knowing to whom. Has everyone commented? That's not everyone who said yes and no. What is the point of living if you are not true to your blueprint? Anyone else? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. I'm not sure the space is safe to share. Oh, that's a great one to end on. Let's get rid of you here. Yeah, we did that. This is a bit of a jump, apologies, but I did want to talk about this, but maybe it's actually better to do it like this. Yes. So something I've been thinking about a lot is I've been hearing often that people, like so often when I was having conversations with my friends, it's like people are advocating sometimes for the death of people. And I'm against this 100%, 1,000,000%, 1,000 billion percent. And I was wondering I'm of the opinion that you should fight for people, regardless if they have the same views as you, regardless if they share the same culture as you, regardless of any of those things. I believe everyone has a right to live, and everyone has the right to live freely and speak freely and do what they want to do. But do you agree? Do you think that, would you fight for someone that may never fight for you? Now, that's a hard, messy question. And that's because it is a messy question, and that's fine. I'll give you 30 seconds. Sounds biblical. Yes, 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 yes. Depends why they wouldn't fight for you. Yes, 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 yes. And then so my next question is, so what's the line? What's the line they need to cross to stop you fighting for their right to exist or be? I'll give you another 10 seconds. Violently oppress me. Violence. Like, would you fight for people in jail then? Like, violence oppressed me is very different from violence in general. Violence oppressed me is very specific. Being a tool of their agenda without knowing. Well, without knowing, that's a very interesting point. So if they don't know, could you fight for them so that they could find out? And I am literally out of time. Okay. And the last
Feel
question.
free to finish.
End of this. And so, yeah, the big question I have now just in my mind generally is that are we more or less tolerant? I'm feeling that we're becoming a lot less tolerant in general. I don't know if that's good or bad. There's some things that you just can't tolerate. I'm completely in understanding of this. But there's other things that I feel that are also just massive when they don't need to be. And sometimes I feel that there's no way to rehabilitate. There's no way to get back. There's no way to actually have a dialogue to figure out what someone did. Some things are clear cut and some things are not. And I'm just wondering if our tolerance has disappeared and why. That's it. That's my end of presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. Really great. But we do have to jump immediately to the next one. Göksu, please take the floor.
I'm just sharing the screen. Now I'm starting. So, like approximately a year and a half ago, I started weight training, strength training. And a year ago, I bumped into this image that kind of created a strong desire in me to become this being, which is a mixture of a bodybuilder and a bimbo. And I started to research more about bodybuilders and bimbofication, and I like really admire the stamina and endurance that they go through. And besides that, I realized that they actually generate a hyper self that has no origin, because the body that they have, like they create, doesn't exist actually. And if you think about this simulacra that they're creating, it's a mutation, and it's just like really going towards certain, stretching what a gender could be, and like going to certain different ends, and really becoming a hyper self. And some of the origins of this being could be maybe, these animes like Berserk or Dragon Ball. And of course, cosmetic surgery and female bodybuilders are also could be seen as cyborgs from the point of like using anabolic steroids. And then at the same time, I was also researching about a car crash that happened in Turkey on November 3rd, 1996. And I was reading about Body Without Organs again, and Desiring Machines by Deleuze and Guattari. And, but Body Without Organs, according to Deleuze and Guattari, is a sterile machine or sterile hyper object that has no shape, no beginning, no end, no openings, versus desiring machine could be, let's say, a social production. It has fluids. And on November 3rd, 1996, this car crash happened. It was just a normal car crash. And inside this car, they figured out that there was 3 of them died, 1 of them escaped. There was a guy that was wanted by Interpol. Another guy was a Kurdish MP from that former right-wing government. Another guy, a former head of the police department, and the fourth person was a former beauty queen. And it was like this almost J.G. Ballard story. And they also found weapons in the truck by that was a gift by Israel government, Israel. So while I was researching on this, I was thinking about the body that was created during the Turkish modernization compared to the Ottoman body, so to say. This new body was trying to become a Western ideal, a simulacra that didn't exist, that didn't have an origin. And this, for instance, is from 1940. It's from a magazine called The New Man, and they were depicting how the new modern men and women should be in Turkey. And you see two muscular bodies, like, you know, trying to hold a rope and working. And I was also, for my master's thesis, I was researching about the representation of women in the nation. And I was almost struck by the idea that there was a prototype that was created almost like an AI. And all the people, including me, where we were trying to become that prototype, the simulacra, in a different way. We either noticed or not. And this is the car crash that happened. And this is from my piece, Venus, a bodybuilder on a desiring machine here. And this is this car that had the crash. And this is the car in 2010s. After, you know, it was a body without organs. The crash happened. It started to leak. It started to leak the fluids that it was trying to hold into it, and started to decay. And this is after the decay. This is maybe in camouflage or in the parts are completely dismantled, and also you can see that it just like I don't know if it's dead or not. And I mean, if it's the body without organs again, or if it's just a dead body, I'm not sure about it. And when I'm thinking about decay, I would talk about camouflage, because for me, instead of a figure-ground relationship that is mostly understood in the art context and in so many contexts, I would go with the notion of taqiyya from Islam, which is in Quran. I grew up as Muslim. I was practicing it intensely until the age of 21. And according to Quran, Allah says that if you're in danger, if you would like to hide yourself, it's okay to lie, and it's okay to become another being. Let's say you can take drugs if everyone around you is taking drugs. If you're still a believer, you are a believer. If you pretend to be a Christian, it's okay. And this is the actual origin of jihadism. It's an offense method instead of a defense method. And it's a form of camouflage. I see taqiyya as a form of camouflage in the way that is being practiced in certain places. And when we think about decay is also a little bit of, decay can be seen, you know, decay is seen as death, but decay can also can be perceived from a speculative, non-fictive perspective, can be perceived as becoming another, slowly merging in with the other, and literally being in camouflage through the process of decay, or through the process of camouflaging yourself. And you really shapeshift to another identity, and this identity takes you over. It becomes your shelter. You are a nomad in this identity. And at the same time, you can almost like LARP, but not really LARP. You can really, stay in camouflage. In the meantime, when I was thinking about decay and camouflage, I was also thinking about the notion of fist. Because the fist can be so many things. The fist can be a demonstration object. The fist can be a pleasure object. The fist can be certain different gestures from the Turkish political parties that used in the past. And it can also be a body without organs if you think about it, because if you put this glove on, it just becomes a sleek surface that can kind of, I don't want to say penetrate, because become a circulation object in order to discover another organ and become one and merge with another organ. I'm out of time right now, right? It's 7 minutes.
Yeah, if you just like to come to a close.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much. Just a little note for everyone, please hold on to your questions and thoughts, because I'm sure there's lots and lots to say and think about silencing, decay, camouflage. So keep on to them when we go into the public debate. And now I want to welcome Kat, please.
Thank you so much. I just need 2 seconds to get this set up. Good evening. There's a way to think of blood as something we all have. And yet I want to begin by suggesting that blood in its attendant manifestations, presentations, and allegorizations, and much like the bodies that produce it, is anything but a neutral surface. We know this from myriad sources, but I want to highlight for our purposes today, given that we gathered the Metabolic Museum, just one of them, Anthony Ryan Hatch's book, Blood Sugar, Racial Pharmacology and Food Justice in Black America, in which Hatch looks at epidemiological data to explore how Black Americans are both placed at greater risk and have a harder time accessing treatment for metabolic disorders like type 1 diabetes. In what follows, I want to look at a different kind of data, at transvisual cultural production, to explore what the resonances and dissonances between transness and blood can teach us about as the generous prompt offered by today's organizers requested, societal and aesthetic boundaries. I want to think about transness as a living alloy, a recombination of what is given to create something stronger than its originally constituted parts. To become an alloy, something must be heated until it is molten, a process semi-literalized here by Castle's, who lit themselves on fire. But Castle's own understanding of their trans body does not partake of the surgical or hormonal processes that other trans folks define and facilitate their transness through. There is much, then, to learn about blood from the multiple, even conflicting truths about transness. So I want to get past what I call the trad politics of blood, those that facilitate gatekeeping around cis, het, or bionormative family, often at the expense of queer and trans children, to a trans aesthetics of blood, to see or seek blood not only within but also beyond the corporeal, using a method that rhymes, as Clementine started off with Preciado's alchemical imaginary of the ways in which trans bodies exceed normative formulations of the divide between interior and exterior. In L. Perez's Dahlia and David Fag with a Scar That Says Dyke, venal blood is brought out through cutting to produce a historically gendered word on a body of a subject situated titularly as the binary object of that word. Yet reclamations of the term dyke and fag grow out of a queer, even punk rejection of the systems that produced them as hate speech. This ritual scarification here, which partakes of BDSM and adjacent practices, repositions the network of inquiries into binary sex and gender surfaced by these words and by the body onto which dyke is being cut in a framework of desire that seduces the viewer in glistening, irregular bloodlines toward a relationality that holds skin in its rupture, pain and pleasure, the individuated and the alloyed together at once, and suggesting that the ways in which sex and gender are traditionally structured feed in and give form to other systems of oppression. In a slightly later work, Perez offers a flooded mangrove plain in tones that allow for the individuation of water and air, plant matter, and reflection, and yet which challenge those distinctions at every turn, leveraging a trans aesthetics to suggest something about sociality beyond the cis heteronormative. Each of these plants are distinct soma, yet are deeply interconnected, and both live and are figured in a way that points up the qualities of entanglements without erasing differences. Mangrove also partakes of a very queer genealogy. During the AIDS crisis, when blood in queer contexts first took on the homophobic valences of infection and contamination with which they remain freighted today, artists turned to the ecological broadly, but the anthropogenic specifically to allegorize man-made loss of life at scale in ways that also open on to questions about where my blood ends and yours begins, where a single body ends and a whole ecosystem begins. Taken today, in the middle of the more advanced climate crisis, Perez gestures toward a new urgent contingency. The populations most susceptible to the effects of anthropogenic climate change, after all, often include disproportionate numbers of queer and trans people of color. Ecologies, like blood, are anything but a neutral surface. Finally, to the background of my image of my Bureau d'Esprit, an installation, I Want Your Blood, consisting of dozens of bottles of menstrual blood collected by Christine Clifford from friends, family, and lovers, and curated here in this particular formation by Jasmine Wahi and Rebecca Pauline Jampel. Now, menstrual blood and its attendant experiences tends to be associated with a biologically essentialized understanding of womanhood, both its inception and its cessation considered vitally important to those who experience or wish to experience it, but with a vast range of affective relations to it, right? A rite of passage, a curse, a promise, a tell, a rupture, an opening to real and conceptual possibilities and real and conceptual traumas. Yet Clifford collects these from an almost endlessly vast range of embodiments and identifications that includes, among others, trans women. Thus inviting the question not only of what precisely menstruation is, but also, and I think as powerfully, of what the meanings associated with this process, whether affirming or more sinister, can tell us about trans and gendered expectations, their fabrication, perpetuation, and policing, and also potentially their disruption. Ultimately, a transposition, 2 words, may offer an aesthetics of transposition. One word that, however momentary or provisional, offers a glimpse of what is, repositioned so that we can see not just the skeiny surface, but the blood flow below. As a recent work done just yesterday by Z. Ty Richardson in Miami of trans women of color folding flags, counting the number of trans women of color who've been killed in the US so far this year. This isn't some utopian dream or a medical dystopian Albtraum, but rather a hyper-presentist possibility that in coming to these phenomena from a different vantage point, we might not just glimpse, but be able to bring about a world in which trans blood is collected and cared for pleasure and admiration, far more frequently than it is shed in the streets. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you. Great. We now had 3 provocations. And I'm now very curious to hear our sabotages. We will start with May Howard. May, the floor is now yours.
Hi, I have 2 quick notations that I want to kind of add to the presentations that have come so far, and then a few questions. So the first in my formulation of response to Kat, Danielle, and Goku comes from blood within the context of care work, access, intimacy, and BDSM formulations in relationship to the disabled body, what I call disabled erotic. So my desire here and my provocation back to you is to examine how disabled queer and trans people can relate to sensuality and dependency through bloodshed, specifically using BSM as a form of reflexive agency. This is then located within fissures of unruly, disorderly, queered, messy, or overflowing cryptness. And so if we're thinking about centralizing blood as a material and almost therefore after as a specter or form of haunting, I'm interested in exploring various techniques and methods of navigating pain, building consensual relationships and care webs that BDSM communities foster. Secondly, I'm thinking about blood in relationship to its chronopolitical, biopolitical, and necropolitical apparatuses as a means of measuring disability and more importantly, debilitation. So if we're looking at formulations of bodybuilders or transness, right, like how are these figures being located not only as an identity politic that's growing, but also as a debilitated politic or a haunted ghost that kind of exists within discourse within a certain spectacle. Mel Chen defines this form of animation or an animacy as more than the state of being animate, and it is precisely the absence of a consensus around its meaning that leaves it open to both inquiry and resignification. So this animation of blood itself dictates an encounter that is impotent, rarely tempered, abrasive, rather than digestible. The material of blood itself then becomes a ghostly specter that is both tangible in what we can see and witness, often again as a spectacle, and intangible in its incessant reference to pain, death, and suffering. The impetus of this work, I think, is to highlight the fragility and sturdiness of being and sensing, of building strength, of transness, of transition, as they relate to insatiable needs and dependencies that we all possess. Lastly, I want to notate that blood and the fear of it constitutes biopolitical and necropolitical relations between race and disability, as seen within medical negligence in the US, as Kat briefly mentioned, as exemplified by scholars such as Nirmala Aravella, Stacey Milburn Park, and Alice Wong, state-sanctioned violence and ongoing genocide occurring internationally, which results in a simultaneity of bloodshed, a numbness to the very bloodshed itself, and a complete severing of medical treatment due to risk and lack of adequate resource, resulting in large-scale debilitation. So some questions that I have for all three people, whether it's in the virtual realm or in this more like embodied or growth specter, are how does blood constitute notions of citizenship and care? In other words, what does blood as a specter and material matter propose as a provocation of slipperiness when within national identity and belonging? How does blood as care work politic destabilize notions of hyper objects themselves? How does hauntology in relationship to blood destabilize individual posturing of embodiment? And finally, how does blood instigate or take away the ability to be a present witness through its measurement within spectacle? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We jump on to Ollie. Thank you for the questions as well. I was trying to note them down. I will probably back to you and
I can write them in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. Ollie, please.
Wow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Danielle, Goksu. Wow, yeah, I'm kind of gagged by the presentations and like the different formats. I, in truth, struggle to sabotage the provocations that I feel are already being sabotaged by the structures and the society in what you're saying. And so I suppose to think of sabotage in this context and in this frame of blood, something that I don't think needs no introduction as one of the most potent of bodily fluids and the most divisive of structural pillars. Blood is at once a connective tissue and a disputable organ. Blood gives life, but is non-living. It is a cell without a nucleus that provides the engine for vitality, as much as it pertains to the possibility of risk and death. Drawn up as kinship, drawn out as oath, blood enters, exits, responds, transports, removes, regulates, clots, leaks, pours, and contaminates. So I suppose then that sabotage in the shape of one such bodily fluid might conspire most successfully through its capacity for risk by means of that contamination or infection. So in the little time that I have to respond, I would like to try and briefly and completely illustrate three figures of sabotage that I hope could help invoke and maybe align in some way to these different models and positions or transpositions that speak to the kind of nature of where someone's blood ends and another begins, and camouflage through decay, and this sense of opening up and leakage that is almost necessary. when we speak about the body. I want to first introduce the contrast agent, which is a substance that when injected and ingested into the body is used to reveal and enhance the blind spots of medical machinery. One example is a rare earth element called gadolinium, which is often deployed as a contrast agent in MRI scans. By itself, gadolinium is highly toxic, but when administered as a controlled contamination, the contrast agent enables, against that very risk of fatal depletion into areas of the body, the ability to illuminate its ingestures in a structure. So I wonder here if we can maybe think of the contrast agent not as a metal, but as a person, as an artist, as a practice. I'm also very drawn to the figure of the auto-transfusionist. It's now possible for someone to have transfused their own blood using a process called cell salvage. When someone is hooked up to the cell saver machine, as it is known, the auto-transfusionist circulatory system is extended and augmented, undergoing a controlled process, in which blood is collected, washed of unwanted but otherwise vital parts in that context, before being reinfused back into the body. And so I like to maybe think of the auto-transfusion as a practice of sustainment and infiltration. Perhaps though the ultimate kind of sabotage, and I connected a lot to what Göksu was introducing and moving between this sense of opening up and boundary breaking. But perhaps the ultimate sabotage is the kind waged against oneself. And so the third figure I would like to introduce is that of the sexual identity of a pig. Pig sex emerged, most formally in the earlier 21st century and in the age of antiretrovirals. The pig is one who engages in the extremities of sexual practice and bodily exchange against risk and infection. As João Florencio terms, gay pig masculinities trouble the very porosities of the body. They write, as Deleuze and Guattari have warned us, whilst deterritorializations bring with them the risk of self-obliteration for what they called the body without organs, still needs organs to function. Carefully managed deterritorializations can break the subject without actually shattering it. They have the capacity to foster a becoming of the body by exposing it to new sets of orienting principles and relations that may offer some respite from or point to ways out of the Oedipal structures and symbolic regimes that have heretofore governed and disciplined our world, bodies, and thought. The pig troubles a relationship to risk, self-destruction, and the erotic that overrun the imaginary social boundaries which seek to mark and control a body's own entanglement of thresholds and membranes. And so I think it might be in the extremities of such a subculture that a biosociality of desiring self-sabotage might emerge outside of these normative structures of relation and hospitality. I like to try and invoke these examples in conversation, and I wonder which stick. But to kind of wrap up, I don't want to necessarily glorify or romanticize the latter's practice, but I think this question of porosity and a willingness to open and transform litters this conversation. And I'd like to think a bit more about what this translocational transposition means when practices sit on the edge of accepted structured behaviorings or ways of controlling bodies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. That wraps up our speakers' presentations. Thank you, everyone. That was absolutely amazing. My head is working, and I would like to open up the public debate in a second. I will also ask the provocateurs to react to the sabotages. We were talking now about silencing, about generating a new self, about like a speculation that is becoming. another. Blood as anything that is not neutral, but everything but neutral. Something that interconnects, but also I feel like with CAD you also touched upon this glimpse of bringing about, of a speculative bringing about. And then I also really enjoyed the point of the ghostly spectre and Ollie's sabotage agents. So thank you all very much for this. So we will now go into the public debate, and I will again give you some pointers to like structure, basically. So first of all, please everyone turn on your camera, because we want to talk to each other. We want to see our faces, we want to interact. And this is just, more immediate, it's more personal, and it just makes sense. So please turn on your camera, everyone. And we do not like to use the chat that much, but I feel like today is a bit different. So we can also improvise with that a bit. But keep your microphones muted anyways, unless you speak. And if you want to speak, you're very welcome to raise your hand. I will call upon everyone that is lined up. But if you feel like you just, want to throw something in, just you do you. That's no worries. I'm just kind of here for a bit of structure and orientation. That's it. We just want to encourage everyone to engage. If you don't want to engage verbally, shake your head, nod, whatever you want to do physically is also very welcome. And to kick off our public debate, I would like to invite the provocateurs to react to the sabotages we just heard.
Can I just jump in here and say how happy I am to see certain faces, and to thank the provocateurs and the saboteurs, and really to ask you guys to exactly show us your face, because it's practically impossible otherwise to have a discussion. It doesn't feel fair. And I think we've talked a lot about that kind of issue of equity. And I'd be grateful if those of you would not just show us your names, but show us your human side. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I go back to Joanna.
No, yeah, as I said, I would be super curious to hear what you think about what we just heard from the sabotages, maybe also regarding your own provocations, Göksu, please.
I wouldn't call this like an answer to sabotages, but more like continuing the speculation to a certain degree. I may have, and Ollie, they both asked and came with very interesting, more intense theories. I tried to note some things down, but of course it was impossible. Unfortunately, I'm not an AI yet. But how I was coming to the debating chamber was thinking about not having the blood, like cutting the blood, thinking about a space without the blood, and speculating about this hyper reality of a space that is possibly without leakage or without blood. And that's why I also talked about this car crash that happened, because until then, Turkey was also trying to, of course, trying to become a simulacra of this Western identity, Western ideal that never ever existed in the Middle East. And the crash was a part of kind of revealing these leakages and these the blood or the other fluids from the body. So that was what was coming into my mind. And I was thinking about also nation states, and in a nation state, like also thinking about the book Crash, like how Zadie Smith has a very interesting foreword to the book by J.G. Ballard, and the way in the book that how the crash was seen, how the disabilities were seen as a part of a reality, and how prosthesis was seen. For me, at the beginning, it was very problematic, but after reading Zadie Smith's foreword, it started to become another almost dystopic entity. And and if you think about also the nation state building in Turkey, unfortunately, of course, there was no thought of disability, or the non-disabled bodies were trying to be also hyper selves, like these Soviet sculptures to a certain extent, like super muscular, and no one was like that, and super healthy. And in this magazine called The New Man that I showed two bodies, like very muscular bodies. And in the first issue of this magazine, unfortunately, I couldn't find it, but I had it in my master's years 10 years ago. They depict a body that was the Ottoman past, that is crawling, and they depicted another muscular male body that was walking properly, and that was the new man that the nation state wanted to build. So thinking about also the questions of me, I think in my speculation, if you think about these hyper nation building entities, I'm not sure if they allow us even to talk about such topics. So that was what was coming into my mind, instead of like really replying, but more of like new thoughts emerging and new decaying to another extent, so to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Göksu. I mean, yeah, in the end, you came towards not allowing to speak about it. So now I'm immediately thinking about Danielle's provocation, and I also, because it was also something that popped up a lot of times, this question of violence in different formats, and I was thinking about this sentence of silence is even more violent than engaging very often. And I would be very interested to hear if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in just for a quick second. So for me, it's very interesting. For me, blood is like one of the most basic things. It's like everyone has blood. All the animals have blood. The conversation was up here, and I feel like blood is like at ground level. Blood is like everywhere, accessible to all, whether you like it or not. It just is. You have it in you, and you can spill it. The other thing I really thought about often, strongly, was like when you give blood. And so I don't mean the act of like giving blood to someone, but I mean the act of like a donation. But I mean the act of like when you put yourself in harm's way that could potentially lead to your blood spilling. When someone makes you spill blood, unbeknownst to you, for a scenario that they create. Like usually these scenarios are not highly educational. They are the most basic scenarios, the most everyday things. They come out of nowhere. There's no expectation. There's nowhere to theorize when they'll come. They just are and exist, and then you see the blood. And so, like, for me, that's an important point to make, of like, let's not go too high into the theory of it when it's something that's so real that people die from it. And so I just wanted to make sure we have that grounding, just to begin a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was like the idea of, for me, if I'm going to be honest, there's a reason it's very hard to just talk in Zoom or to talk in these things, is because you think you're going to say the wrong thing and sound dumb as fuck. That's fine. Like, that is like, we're all thinking that. You think you're going to say something, depending on what country you are, you think you're going to say something and something's going to happen to you. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose all this. Like, this is happening all the time right now. Like, there is a reason that when we're talking about blood, we're skirting round rather than talking about certain things. That is in the air, palpable. You can eat it. You can feel it. You just can't see the blood being spilt from that. But that too, I believe, is like blood. It's like your lack of livelihood. When the blood drains from your face because you're so scared of what might happen to you, that is blood. That's the movement of it. This is a bit of a wibbly wobbly, apologies, but I just feel it's important to think about, like, not only like the loss of blood, what that can lead to, but what certain things make your blood boil, the blood fall away from you, you too scared to type what you think, you sitting there having a bunch of opinions but actually having no way to express them. What makes you think about having a monthly cycle, surgery, all of the choosing to spill blood for access to a new life, all these types of things, blood bond. Like, I think all of these are really interesting, scary, very natural, human, lowbrow things, which is the amazing thing about blood. You don't need to know anything about it to know a lot about what it means when you see it. That was very wibbly wobbly, but I wanted to say something.
I'm glad to follow on from there. I don't think it was wibbly wobbly at all. Or if it was, I just appreciated and like totally gelled with it. I was also, when I was preparing for this session, I was also, Danielle, thinking about that, like the fundamentality of blood, right? That like so many of us have blood coursing through our veins, right? And I was doing research on blood, and one of the things that I learned is that it's now possible to make synthetic blood. So, you know, some of us have different blood types that I'm so not a scientist or like pay attention to my, like, I have no idea what my blood type is, but like there are different blood types, some of which can only receive or give to or from other blood types. And now it's possible to make synthetic blood, which is going to change the way that blood is given, right? So, which has valences that like seem really basic, like we all need blood, and if we lose blood, we all need more of it, and that comes either from your body generating it or from one getting an infusion, right? But that the politics of blood infusions are very complicated, right? Like one can't give blood if one is a man who has sex with men or other high risk categories for the transmission of certain viruses, right? So this is not like it's charged in really particular ways depending on who one is talking about. And one of the reasons I wanted to begin with the work of Tony Hatch, talking about metabolic disorders and like the racialization of metabolic disorders, their testing and treatment in the United States, is that, right, everything in the US is filtered through this highly racialized concept. Like, you know, we cannot get away from that here. And so I think it's important to frame so much of what we're talking about through that. At the same time, you know, and that opens all of these like really interesting questions up, in particular because, right, humans on all continents have blood, but blood is a network, as May said. The networks shift shape and look different from different perspectives, or depending on where we're looking at them. And also to sort of bring this into Ollie's to Ollie's sort of conversation, blood is something that it is highly susceptible. Like, it's not only not a neutral surface, but it's highly susceptible, right? It takes contamination and it shoots that contamination through the body, right? So it can infect that network. And those resonances of infection, right, are deeply imbricated with the AIDS crisis. And Ollie, when you were speaking about pig sexuality, I was also thinking about bug chasing, right? And the history of that, right? I see like lots of nodding. So we're here, like, you know, I was trained in part by Tim Dean. So thinking about all these valences and how they ebb and flow over time gives me this sense of this sort of multidimensional chess that we play when we talk about this, because we have the temporal scale, but we also have these almost what I think of as like a lateral scale that goes to one of the things that May was pointing out, right? That like when we think about networks or scale or spatiality or bodies, we're talking about conceptual strength that can be derived from, right, what happens when everything is going well, right? But this conceptual strength of possibility is always in tension with disability and debility, right? And the other ways in which bodies are ordered and sorted and hierarchized. Talk about wibbly wobbly. I think that does that, but that's a summation of some of the thoughts that I had. Thank you all so much.
Sorry. I apologize too much. I always do this. But anyway, the one thing that you made me think about, which I hadn't thought about yet, was blood comparisons. Like how, when someone says your blood is worth less than mine, therefore I can subjugate you. I hadn't thought about that actually, and I thought that was a great point. I thought that was really good, because that not only does that to do with giving blood, but just in the history of like class, that's like a huge thing, that like your blood is unworthy.
So-called blue blood, for example, right?
Yeah, like royal. Yeah.
I have to add something because I keep thinking about it and I don't know where it leads. And that is this viscosity of blood. You know, in every film when blood is spilt, there's somebody rubbing hard to get it off. Yeah, you can't get it off your hands. It's Lady Macbeth. It's everything going on. And it's that there's something incredibly powerful about the fact that you can't get rid of spilt blood easily. And honestly, the amount of dramas I've seen recently where you see someone scrubbing away at this I don't know, at this liquid that shouldn't be spilled. I just wanted to add that into the mix because I kept thinking about this question of spilt blood and the horrendous kind of wars that are going on and what that means when this sort of flow of the river of blood and the kind of the sort of wastage, the carnage of the flesh, that kind of division. When the blood is gone, there's nothing left in the body, right? It's not just the heartbeat. The heart pumps the blood, but that division between the liquid, the viscous liquid, and the corpse is extreme. Anyway, back to you guys. I just wanted to add that.
Sorry, Kat, you just unmuted yourself.
Oh, go for it.
I was just here to kind of try and ask if anyone has any questions, but if you have something you want to throw in, just go for it.
I don't know what it was about Clémentine saying the word corpse several times, but it just reminded me of this fun fact that about the way that we test for testosterone in the body. So this is not having to do with trans-identified folks necessarily, but the way that there are 3 ways to test for testosterone: urine, saliva, and blood. And the majority of the research that we have on testosterone compares studies. So it takes a study on blood, for example, and compares it with a study on urine and develops a scientific takeaway from that. But according to a 2021 book by Rebecca Jordan-Young and Katrina Karkazis, it turns out that these things are entirely incomparable, right? So that mostly all of what we know about testosterone in the body is out of like basically concocted or bad science. And so we have this goes, I think, with that mythology of blood, right? Which we actually, when we think about like blood is never blue, it's just through white skin refracts as blue, right? When blood is spilled, like it gets a little bit darker. As it dries, it gets a little bit more viscous, right? But we have these like conceptual valences. The Lady Macbeth thing is so evocative, right? But also in crime movies when blood is like flowing freely in ways that are like absurd and totally deracinated from the way that it works, that it functions really materially, right? Which just speaks to its potency, I think, the potency of its conceptual implications.
Yeah, Kat, that's making me think of, and I know you've brought this up a few times so far, but like kind of going a little bit deeper into what I was proposing earlier about BDSM and blood, right? Like the Ron Athey performance in the 1990s where he and someone else were cutting each other and they blotted and then hung these pieces of like paper towels with blood above the audience. And there was this like hyperactive fear of contagion as if one could like get AIDS or be contaminated from just being in peripheral to that. And I'm thinking a lot through these conversations about like toxicity, right? And these like low level mundane toxicities versus like something that Mel Chen calls like a toxic spectacular, and like how these measurements and therefore like hierarchies and affects and effects of toxicity in relationship to blood are, yeah, like heightened. I also am a little bit wibbly wobbly today, so I'm glad that I'm on the same page with everyone else.
I'm all here for being wibbly wobbly. You just made me think about blood and its connection to trust, because you talk about the toxicity, the fear of it, the like how it can contaminate so easily, and so it sticks, like what Clementine says. If it's built, it's, you know, sticking to everything, and it's visible, and you can't really remove it. Even if you do it visibly, it will still be there somehow. And how it's also this thing of trust. Like I have to have this like children's image in my head of making like cutting in your finger, and, you know, making kind of this exchange thing. Also, like if you have a transfusion, what you said, Kat, this fact that you can only have a certain blood type that goes into a certain body, and like something that is so specific in a way as well. But that's just a quick thought. Feel free to comment on it. But I would be super interested, May, if you would mind to throw in maybe one of your questions again, whichever one you like, because they were so good, but I really just didn't manage to write them down so quickly, but I would love to hear them again. I think you're typing, right? Sorry, I was just confused. Go for it. But in the meantime, I'm gonna...
May I? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go. I'll do it later.
Like, I mean, thinking about the blood and what was Clementine was also saying about, you know, when the blood leaves the body is just not there anymore. I mean, of course, also with the provocations that came to my mind is also, again, the question of like who is grievable, like the big question that Judith Butler asked some time ago. Again, if you don't see the other as a being with the blood, then you also don't give a fuck if you really bomb them, right? Like that's the whole question of the US invasions in the Middle East, and like how they were seeing that whole region as almost a game, like a computer game. And if they don't see the blood, they just keep invading certain places. Like right now, it's the same thing happening. So many. Unfortunately, some Western countries don't see certain regions or certain people also, or like the same thing about like the blood cannot leave the hand. But if you don't consider blood being there, then there is nothing. So I was just also thinking about these things when you were all talking about the fluids and the body and the medical aspect of it, versus if I don't see you that you are there, you also don't have any blood, and then you don't exist. And if you don't exist, I can just do whatever I can in that land. So I was just thinking about these things when you know, I just wanted to say these when me was writing down the questions, which I'm also very curious about, to be honest.
Hey, I was wondering if I can say something. My name is Christos. I'm actually a doctor. I'm an obstetrician, and I deal with hemorrhages all the time. And I was intrigued by two things. Something that Clementine said about the viscosity of blood. And actually, I need to take about 4 to 5 showers to actually get this blood off my skin, because it pours into my socks, everything. But and also Danielle said something about blood is so basic, but it's the basic things that we really misunderstand in our lives. And actually, for the viscosity of blood to be so in a certain point, there's an elegance to it. If it's too thick, it clots and can cause disease. If it's too thin, you can bleed to death. And it's important to know that actually blood is actually like a portal of energy. It gives flow, it gives fuel to the rest of your body. And it's really important that we really understand its elegance. And for example, a red blood cell's lifespan is 120 days. And within the blood, you have a red blood cell that's 119 days old and one that's 2 days old. It's not even ageless. It coexists between a baby red blood cell and an old red blood cell. For example, you have diseases of the blood, such as sickle cell disease and sickle cell carriers, which exists in Africa, but that disease is actually evolved to become protective against malaria. So it's really important to understand how resilient and elegant blood is at the same time. And although it's basic, we really need to understand the basic to be able to distort it, decay it, transfuse it, infuse it, and take it to other places. Thank you.
Warren, I think
Warren wants to say something.
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Christos.
You're muted still, Warren.
Yeah, how's that? Better? Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay, good. So I think a very important question to all of this is the forensics of blood. I was surprised that no one, brought this up. In a way, the last commentator, the doctor, I found it interesting because there's a forensics in medicine and diagnostics. There's this incredible forensics. Maybe one day AI will do it for. I'm going to turn that off. Sorry about that. I think there's a forensics in differential diagnosis that doctors make. One day an AI will do that. But I also find it interesting that at a crime scene, there is this idea of forensic spilt blood that's no longer in the body, as many of you were fascinated by. This blood without corporality, this blood that leaves the body and is distributed, splashed along many surfaces, very difficult to clean up, but becomes forms of evidence of various types of evidence. Maybe it'll give a DNA code of the perpetrator of the crime. Perhaps it will be, other filaments or things will be mixed in. But it's interesting that I think this idea of forensics, I think, goes at the heart of many of the discussions. And I just wondered what anybody thought about that. It's more of a question than a statement. Sorry about this. Sorry, I can't speak right now. Don't call me back. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren.
Any comments about what I just said?
Yes, I'm not a forensic expert at all, so I'm not going to comment on the nitty-gritty. But like something that's amazing about what you said is that like you can read someone's blood to tell you what happened. They read the blood spray on the walls, like the angle it's sprayed off at, like where the smudges are. I think there's a particular name for the drop of blood from like the perpetrator on the victim that allows you to like figure out who that perpetrator is. Like, oh, that blood, that one drop is not from the victim, that's from XYZ who. And I think that's something amazing that you can read. But it's really interesting hearing Christos and you speak after each other, actually, because like you both, one's like an internal investigation into blood, and then the other's the external investigation into the blood, and they both have Lord of the Rings books attached to each of them, which you can navigate so much if you know how to read it. And that's another interesting thing is I have no idea how to read either of those. The only way I have access to understanding blood is if like I've cut myself or I've hurt myself and I need to go to someone to help me figure out what to do. But out there are people that can look at blood that's old as hell and say, this is what's happened to it, or look at blood inside the body and say, this is what's happening to it. And I find those two things like very fascinating in terms of actually maybe like understanding, but also caring about that particular blood. But it does make me think about who gets to have those investigations into their blood. And so sometimes people get the whole squad out and they get the whole crew and they'll come and look at every inch of the crime scene. And then other times they don't get anything. As well as like, depending on what country you're in, you may get the thorough investigation into what blood disease you have and the treatment to treat it. And in other cases, you may just be sent home. And so it's really interesting talking about the specifics and the extent that both of those investigations can go to, and also how they're capped depending on the worthiness of the person who spilled that blood or who has that blood.
Can I say one more thing? I don't mean to take time. Is it okay for me to ask another question? Well, one of the things that I found so interesting is that I've been writing a lot about the the brain without organs. I think the body without organs is an interesting concept, that it really has to do with Fordist types of labor, and it had to do with, of course, Deleuze-Guattari's idea of the kind of despotism of psychoanalytic and Freudian talk therapy, linguistic therapy. But we've been transitioning, and this is my own research, and I understand that it's very esoteric, and I'm sorry for even talking about it, but I think it can lead to some interesting concepts, maybe, I don't know. And that is like, yes, the body without organs is a phenomena in which the body no longer has it, the kind of enemy of the body is the organization of the organism itself, the organization of the organism. And it was really Artaud who really came out with the idea of the body without organs. And it was later taken by Deleuze and Guattari in 1,000 Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus, and developed into the kind of powerful theoretical structure it was. But it turns out that in the age of cognitive capitalism, which we are today, where the brain and the mind are the factories of the 21st century, we're no longer proletariats. We no longer believe in some people believe in the proletariat revolution, but others don't. We are now what Franco Berardi calls cognitariats, mental laborers working in front of screens, swiping and clicking on mice, and creating data. The data is not passive; it's aggressive. It's very destructive, and it actually the material brain. And by the material brain, I don't mean the brain that's encased in the skull. I mean the brain that is part of an intracranial, extracranial situated complex that incorporates sociogenesis, Fanon's sociogenesis, talked about by Sylvia Wynter, this idea of the power of the narrative. And it's that's where the brain is. The brain is also the cosmos, the original Big Bang. The brain is also the post-humanist brain of Rosie Bardotti, in which we no longer have just specifically human consciousness, but we have to incorporate animal and plant consciousness into our ideas of brain. So this brain is now a brain without organs, and just to limit it to culture, because we can't talk about all these things simultaneously. Of course we can, because that was a beautiful statement you made. I forgot the speaker, but this idea of this very complex epistemological structure that is not only is a kind of, maybe it's four-dimensional because time is included, that all these things, it's hard to map them out and understand it. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at when you think about the culture brain, you have to think about this idea of how culture is plastic and culture is constantly changing and developing. We see that all the time. Look at architecture, for instance, the manifestation of those cultural relations. And then we have to understand that the brain is also plastic. And this plasticity, this capacity to be not the prisoner of the genetic code, or the prisoner of specific socio-political economic regimes. What I call the neural bios instead of the neural zoe in relationship to Agamben and Aristotle, right? Then we have this incredible other concept that I just wanted to bring in there to talk about the brain without organs. Let's talk about the body without organs, but let's not forget about the brain without organs. Thank you.
Please, May and Kat, go for it.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you just proposed, but I'm also wary of that proposition because I think it posits the brain and body in a separation. I'm like specifically thinking about this in relationship to like critical disability studies and the framing of what Eli Clare and many others call like the body mind. And so to separate the brain and the body, or to assert the brain as functioning outside of the body, I think gets into wary territory around prosthetics, mobility devices, and et cetera, where, as well as, what people declare as like those who are living vegetables, right? Or like cognitive disorders, learning disabilities, et cetera. So I think, although I appreciate that provocation, I also am weary when one begins to kind of separate the two in relationship to ranking cognitive function or kind of vilifying the brain's cognition as important in a way that ignores the body, because I think it also leaves a lot of people, specifically people who are physically impaired, behind in that conversation.
Well, thank you. But I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, that I said that it was situated. And by the word situated, the situated body takes into consideration the body. It doesn't talk, it's not separating the mind and the brain or the body and the brain at all. It's actually incorporating that. The gut, for instance, the gut is the microbiome is another aspect of the brain. Just to give you an example. And the vagus nerve that connects the stomach to the brain is also part of that thing. As far as disabilities go, I can't be more empathic to what you're saying. But I just think that, like, for instance, let's talk about people who have paraplegia, people who can't move, and who are using brain-computer interfaces. For instance, if you go to Brown University and you go to brain-computer interfaces and you go to that site, you will see these amazing things done with people who cannot move any part of their body, who are now manipulating with their brainwaves. They're manipulating robotic arms to feed themselves, and they're able to move around a building. The idea of neural diversity is very, very important, and it's something that we all need to be talking about. Neural diversity versus neural normativity. Right-wing governments prefer neural normativity and a pliable subject to be able to be controlled and manipulated. I'm agreeing with you. Believe me, this whole discussion is about the body. We started out with the blood and and the argument of trans and all of the all the kinds of things that Procadio does and all that. We were talking about that. I was just suggesting that we think about something else. I'm not dismissing the body. I was just adding something that might be interesting to think about in relationship to these other ideas. But the world has changed. The world has changed, and we are cognitarians, whatever that means. And it's time to realize that, and because the possibilities of what that will mean for us is very scary as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, no, I'm agreeing with you, but just I wanted to add a little bit. I want to explain myself a little bit better, because I know what I'm talking about is,
Yeah, thank you for your contribution, Warren. I would love to hear from Kat, because you also just raised your hand, as I saw it before.
Yeah, I was just trying to follow May in their hand raising. I kind of want to return to this, to Danielle's comment, actually, about who gets to access blood testing, because I think it resonates with other things that we can't see in blood, right? Like this is sort of just to go to sort of where we began, where Clémentine began us off, right? That we can't find transness in blood. You can't test for, we think under these frankly and extremely antiquated medical frameworks that we can test for sex. But if we look at, for example, recent historical research by the trans historian of trans science, Beans Velosi, who's shown us that all of the science of sex that we have today it comes out of primarily, but not exclusively, US-based racial eugenic science. The categories of male and female, as science understands them today, is a product of trying to prove some sort of framework for the superiority of the white race, right? And so when we're looking for the female, for example, in blood, we find that only because we're also looking for, out of a gesture toward trying to locate and separate out whiteness from blackness, and at least in the US context, right? And so when we take these pathways that back us up to help us understand how we are testing blood and how we are interpreting the data that we find, right? We come to understand, I think, a little bit about how we develop these ideas that we superimpose onto what we see, which I think is really, I think that's part and parcel with what Danielle is talking about. It's who gets access to these, and then how do we come up with these frameworks that show us what we think we're looking at?
You know, to open this up a bit more, I thank you all for these amazing contributions. I would really be very curious for the rest of the audience, what you think, if you have any questions, if you have any comments. I see so many more faces and names. I would love to hear from you. Or, yeah, even any questions regarding our speakers today. Yeah, I feel like this question is always met with silence. I dug that home myself. Look, who do we have? We have Ernst, Nina, Burcu, Lise, Rob, Elena.
I guess silence is the best metaphorical way of getting blood on your hands, so.
There we are.
Maybe I can just jump in again and just say to you that as the last session of this debating chamber, which isn't over yet, I just began to think about quantity of people who attended. And, you know, you normally think, oh, we need lots and lots of people because Zoom is extendable. But the more we can see everyone on the screen, and I can see you all, so to speak, the more it feels like it's a chamber, it's a chambre. It's not some big mega conference. And I think that's what we need to go towards with the debating chambers, is that they are places of exchange. And, you know, one of the problems we have, and I think that Danielle brought it up, is this issue of trusted interlocutors, you know, who you can exchange ideas about. And the very fact that this particular debating chamber is leading us in many different directions, it's wonderful. I mean, we're covering a lot of ground, and it's fertile. Yeah, it's productive. But perhaps this is the point where I would then go back to the faculty and say, hey, Eddie, how do you feel about this? Or Ollie, do you want to come back in? Whilst our friends out from in the chamber can formulate their own questions. So Eddie, Ollie, maybe Eddie, could you begin? How do you see this?
Sure thing. No, thank you very much. I found everything extremely stimulating, and two words that kind of stuck with me is this contamination and filtration, because it kind of reflects very much the time we're living now, you know, especially when it comes to this analyzation that we talked about the blood. You know, it has, like, when I was a teenager, it was sci-fi, you know, like in the film Gattaca or something, but it's now like our reality, especially with AI filtering what we see and what we watch and what we hear. You know, there's this tendency that you are even more that we even more distance each other from each other. You know, that there's more and more separation. And what I found beautiful, like especially like in your artistic practices, that there's this kind of form of contamination to get people attracted to these opinions and topics. You know, I mean, most visually probably with this gamification of these topics by Danielle, or with the exposing of the body in Göksu works. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you think what's next. Do we need some kind of activism in deactivating these biopolitics, or where are we going with all this?
Maybe I can add there. I wanted to come back to actually Danielle's presentation, and I think it was in the first or second trees, you know, in the decision making, but this just the notion of trauma bond, which somehow speaks for me a lot to just the kind of situation we're in of social media, and just the nature of how it's operating in a inherently like bloodless way, and this sense of being scared to be oneself online, and just the nature of the way the internet has shifted over the years from these siloed dark forests, as it's kind of been understood. Like the early internet was such a different place, and it instigated such a different kind of kinship or community. And I think the place we're in now, it's fractured and siloed, but it operates in a very different way than it did in the 90s or the early 2000s. And I wonder, like, if there's a way to think about blood or bloodlessness, the body of the internet without organs in this conversation, and what we do with it, and like how we deal with the fracturing and the clotting of these spaces that on one hand seek to bring people together and echo, but equally silo and sabotage each other. The nature of like what the algorithm is set up to do. It's I wonder if anyone has any thoughts. And I'm also I really enjoyed seeing the body of decisions that you'd laid out, Danielle, and actually this sense that we were moving through this system of decisions, and we were shaping as much as it was shaping us in the conversation. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts to this notion of trauma bond as a kind of bloodless but blood shedding relation that many people are caught up in.
I've got to jump in. Sorry. You use the word bloodless, and it makes me go crazy. I don't know why. I'm feeling like I just can't accept that. Like, I don't think that it's bloodless. Like, we can begin at the chips and we can end at me seeing someone get shot on Twitter. Like, there's a lot of blood there. It causes people to shoot up schools. Like, there's lots of stuff that happens that is bloodletting. I didn't want to talk about that, but sorry, that's something I just had to jump on, because I feel like it feels like separate from us. Like, a gun is bloodless, but there's a lot of blood that comes from a gun. Social media can be the same, because it's an amazing tool to move large groups of people to do wild stuff. And yeah, this is as we can see, feel, and have done properly. But the other thing I really wanted to kind of go back to, and I've been thinking about it ever since it happened. So when Warren said your point, and then May, you said like a counterpoint, that was the first time I felt like emotion coming from the panel. And for me, that's good. That's really important. And I kind of, I'm not trying to put you a lot on the spot. I kind of wanted to hear more on like what that point was, because it was new for me. I hadn't heard what those 2 points were in terms of like what exactly I got what you were saying, but I just wanted to hear more on it, because I thought it was an interesting point of where, like, we're talking about blood and emotions. Like, most of the sentences I have is like blood boiling, blood this, and I thought it was like a great, amazing thing to get emotional about it. Not to say that you were emotional, but I felt care, like that you cared about what you said and that it was understood and all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that. Like, oh God.
I'd love to actually jump in following that and kind of articulate something that I did not say at the time, but which feels relevant to your question, Danielle, which is the probably unpopular opinion that like, while I have long loved like Deleuze and Guattari, and like the rhizome is one of my favorite creatures, and like the body without organs is like, it's such important reading for so many things. There are also times in which like that, and I'm like such a theory person, and I'm like deeply read in all of the relevant whatevers, because that's how I was trained. I also tend to just think like, when it comes down to it, when we're talking about embodied practice, when we're talking about transness and disability, when we're talking about something like menstruation or abortion, like we can't have a body without organs, because we our bodies and we have organs, right? Sorry, I'm a very expletive laden creature. We have these organs, we have to contend with them. Sometimes their presence exposes us to violence, right? Sometimes their absence exposes us to self-harm, right? And so for me, the theory there runs up it sort of comes up short for me against these things that I know that, like, you know, theory comes out of real practice. It comes from people being in the world, right? It comes from people watching things and experiencing things and thinking about it, right? And so, but for me, when I try to fit one of my favorite texts together with the subjects about which I think most often, I tend to sort of have a little bit of a frictive point. And I say all of this because I think that is part of where that affective fabric or texture arose between Warren and May. And so I just wanted to surface that as probably unpopular opinion as well.
Oh, Goksu. Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing and ask a question. First, the thing that I would like to say is like, you know, the reason that I came up with the body without organs is because I was almost talking about a museum. I went to the 90s of Turkey, and Turkey as an entity in the Middle East and South West Asia, trying to turn into a simulacra of a Western identity. And that's why I brought the body without organs, because I was talking about a late modernism. And I brought up these very modernist ideas to a certain extent. So it was really about almost visiting a museum and this scandal, this car crash that brought up deep state relations on the Kurdish border in relation to Israel. So it's just a side note that I want to say. It was really going backwards to a certain time spectacle in relation to simulacra and a late modernism. And the other thing is, like, I'm reading, going back to the discussion between Warren and May, I would be also happy. I think it's also because of my English is not my mother tongue, so I have a little bit of a problem of understanding the question that May wrote on in the chat. I'll be very happy if it could be explained in a better way. And then when you were talking, when you would be talking about what Danielle asked to Warren and May. Yeah, thank you.
May, the ball is in your court.
Well, the first question, are you asking for a different wording for the first or second question, or both?
Both, please. Like, I really had a little bit of I didn't get it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. So I'm interested. The first question is kind of asking about this like process or presence of haunting as a way of knowing in relationship to blood. So if blood already is kind of possessed within theories of abjection, theories of toxicity, etc., how does this kind of like ever presence or like, yeah, haunting of that as a way of like us understanding blood then be able to like push us in terms of the ways we're thinking about embodiment individually in reference to collective experience. So in other words, like, how do notions of toxicity, abjection, perversity, even moving into a realm of affect, so like fear, disgust, shame in relationship to blood, affect the way that we understand ourselves and the way that we kind of present ourselves in the ways that we are felt within the self in relationship to an other. And I'm thinking about this specifically in reference to like care webs or interdependent relationships as it relates to access needs for disabled people. But I think it relates to all of us because everyone has kind of interdependent, mutual reliant relationships in some way or another. So that was like the first question. And then my second question was, I've been thinking a lot about blood in relationship to BDSM. A lot of my practice has to do with medical fetish and disability, and like reenacting these sort of like medical conditions, but as a performance in relationship to BDSM as a means of opening up other ways of thinking about caring or relating to one another that exist outside of the medical industrial complex, though obviously always in relation to it. And so I think with something like BDSM, or with blood being seen as gory in relationship to death, genocide, suffering, pain, how does that like spectacleness of blood, aka like the queasiness that we even have around it, relate to the ways that we're able to like pay attention to it, or are therefore like desensitized to it? So those are my questions, which and then to go to Danielle's question about my response to Warren, I'm thinking about kind of which I understand that Warren also clarified, so I'm not saying this as like a further rebuttal, but more as a clarification on my end, in thinking about the body for me, as someone who uses a wheelchair, as someone who uses a cane almost every day, but also has the ability to walk at times. I'm curious about the implications of fascination of like brain as motor function, even if it has to do with prosthetics, because to me, my prosthetics aren't seen as like this separate extension of the body or this like form of cyborgness, but more so as like something that allows me to be mobile. I think it's also worth mentioning and like thinking about, because I know someone did bring up the topic of labor earlier, like prosthetics and their use. You know, a lot of funding in the US, or a lot of major funding in the US doesn't go to disabled individuals, but goes to like veterans who need prosthetics post-war. And so the kind of further development of very advanced prosthetics actually goes and kind of relies on this perpetuation of like the US war machine, and in this result of conflict instead of or in contrast to other forms of disablement. I don't think that's necessarily answering Danielle's question, but I am, like thinking about even the basics of like the fact that most disabled people can't afford their prosthetics because most insurance doesn't see it as necessary unless it's usable within the house. So it's not even about an exterior, it's about an interior. And then also how the development of prosthetics actually has to relate more to the utility and use of bodies as laborers, as people who are working and contributing to capitalism as a labor force, and this idea of getting better more than it is about existing within some sort of like livable life for an individual to be autonomous themselves or to be able to be in relationship with one another. So it actually ends up being more about the labor and the further development of that labor and of that workforce more than these like renderings of livability, which, you know, also exist within ableist constructs and can be talked about maybe another time.
Thank you so much, May. I think it was very, very important to go into that again after the short exchange we had before. And thank you for talking about your question again. I'm not sure, Göksu, I kind of felt like I perceived like a reaction from you, like you want to go into the question now. Did I see that right?
Yeah, no, it was just some things that May said kind of made different. I mean, I don't know if it's also, again, just like putting things out there, but like I was thinking about what May said about medical fetish and disability, and I was thinking about my extreme, like also fetish and fisting. And my mom and dad, they're both doctors, and my dad was also sometimes allowing me to see certain smaller surgeries. So I grew up seeing a lot of blood, a lot of organs. But then I all of a sudden had this realization what May was talking about when I didn't think about before. Fisting is a form of this, you know, you put the glove, you have to be very medical and clean. You get into the organ, you touch the organ, whether it's a vagina or anus, but there should be no blood. If there is any blood, that's not, I was just like thinking about these sterile positions and mimicking certain sterile positions versus what May was talking, the fetish, the blood, and also the other thing was like, you know, the US war machines, disability fundings, and then the other places that these war machines are just like totally destroying, and the people there, they just cannot even think about these possibilities of, you know, veterans versus. Yeah, I was just having these thoughts. Maybe they just came across through my face also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also, just to give you the chance again, because you raised your hand before, and I feel like because the conversation went into a direction, I just want to give you the chance to maybe raise that question you just had, Christos, if you feel like it still.
Yeah, hey, I was going to talk about something else, and I think it went another direction. Actually, now coming off of this, as an obstetrician, I've just realized that one of the procedures I do is actually involves me fisting. For example, when the woman's placenta gets stuck, I wear a big glove up to here, and my arm goes all the way into the woman's womb, and I can feel the base, the fundus of the womb, and I have to scrape the placenta away. And I've never seen fisting in that sense before. I've only seen it in a sexual content in my head. So that was just a realization for me that that's actually something I do for a living, and I've never seen it differently. But what I wanted to actually talk about was when Ollie talked about the auto-transfusionist, and then Daniel talked about social media and cancel culture. I actually think they resemble each other, because in social media, every time you go on, there's someone telling you, you can do it on your own, you don't need anybody. Actually, we can't do anything on our own, and we actually need each other to do anything. We're actually social creatures, and we need the love, we need the connection. And the auto-transfusionist, it's also a medical way of, I can do it on my own. I don't need your contaminated blood. I don't need your help. And I've just all of a sudden made a correlation between those two things. And I just thought that was beautiful. I wanted to bring it up.
Thank you as well. I unfortunately have to say we are running out of time. So we do have to come to a close. If there are any more comments or questions to throw in, do raise your hand right now, but I'm going to start wrapping up this session. Yeah, I just want to give a huge thank you to our speakers today. I'm really grateful to have been able to hear your input and thoughts. Danielle, Göksu, Kat, Ollie, May, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, the year is coming to an end, but the MMU isn't. So keep in mind the book launch tomorrow. If you have any chance to be in Berlin in real life, physically, you can, 7 p.m. And yeah, I think the debating chambers are such a great format. I'm really looking forward to next year. I hope everyone has a calm evening, and yeah, much to think about. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
Joanna, you're the best moderator ever, really. I mean, you win all the prizes. And I have to thank Danielle and Göksu and Kat and May and Ollie, because this was, in my experience of the 4 debating chambers, I don't like to make a difference between them, because they were all great and they all had different subject matters. But this one was really intimate, and it's thrown up so many different ideas. And I'm in the middle of reading a very thick book called, maybe you can, oops, you can't see it. It's by Philippe Descola. He's a very famous anthropologist, and I'm not a fan of anthropology, but it's called The Forms of the Visible, about an anthropology of figuration. And he's trying to put across the idea that, okay, contemporary art is very much market-driven. But if you look at figuration, it enables you to see what he calls the invisible linings of figuration. And so I'm going through this, and he talks about prototypes, and I work on this notion of the prototype. And it just felt to me that this idea of the invisible lining is very beautiful. If you think of blood, right? You think of the invisible lining of our organs. And throughout this evening, there's been a a very poetic seesaw between the brutality and the political brutality in which we live, and these other attempts that we've all done through visuals, through your Bureau d'Esprit, through the quiz, which was serious, through these different references that you brought in, to kind of dismantle some of the discourse that we attach to organs. And I think one of the most powerful moments that I had with students was that time when Preciado wrote the manifesto, was this project called Organs and Alliances. And my students really started to investigate the organ trade. And we don't take it nearly as seriously as we should, but the organ trade is happening right, you know, in all the main train stations, in cheap hotel lobbies, in everywhere, in hospitals. In some hospitals in Korea, there's stickers in the bathrooms so that you can, you know, find somebody to donate an organ to, whether it's an eye or it's a kidney. I mean, it's a real issue. And I think that these practices that are below the radar, that seem to be connected to culture in some indirect way, are subject matters which we've touched on today. And I really want to thank you all for this extraordinary session, and to also encourage my brilliant faculty to remember that this is an intimate chamber. It's not a parliamentary chamber. And to thank all the new guests, who Liesel and Rob and Elena and Nina, and Ernst van Hoek, and obviously Christos and Warren. And again, thank you very much and happy Christmas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao, thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.